Jonathan slowly awoke. His eyesight was hazy, similar to what happens when you get up in the morning and first have trouble seeing properly. He seemed exhausted and disoriented, like if he had been asleep for ages. He could hear machinery making faint noises all around him, and the room had the clean, odd fragrance of a hospital. His arms were fitted with cables and tubes to monitor his health. He attempted to sit up out of fear, but was gently pulled back down by someone. "Don't worry, Jonathan," a nice, middle-aged guy with kind eyes, Dr. Shane, stated. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Before returning his focus to Jonathan, he checked the readings and tweaked a few of the equipment. "What happened?" Jonathan croaked in a weak, scratchy voice. "You were in a coma," Dr. Shane patiently said. "You and a few other kids. You're awake now, which is encouraging, but it's been a perplexing scenario." The doctor went on. "A few troopers by the river saw you floating and managed to drag you to the hospital just in time." As Jonathan began to gradually regain consciousness. "You're lucky to have survived. How you got out there in that state is beyond me." The knowledge was difficult for Jonathan's mind to absorb. He vaguely recalled playing with his action figures, but his recollection seemed to be obscured by a fog. He inquired, "What caused it?" Dr. Shane answered, "That's what we're trying to figure out," with a distressed look on his face. "But don't worry, you're safe now." Jonathan had memories flashing back to him as the doctor said. Before everything went dark, he recalled his mother's voice telling him to flee from something frightening. "My mom," he said abruptly, startled. "Is she okay?" Dr. Shane gave a comforting nod. "We're making every effort to locate your mother and the other parents who have gone missing. The cops will be here soon to speak with you about what you recall since they are involved." As Jonathan's heart raced in his chest, he became determined to tell everyone what he knew. He needed to locate his mother and ensure that the person who caused the comas was held accountable. The door to his room opened as if at the same moment, and Dr. Shane and a policeman walked in. "This is Officer Williams," said the physician. Officer Williams said, "Hi, Jonathan," grinning warmly. "Dr. Shane says you may know something that could be useful to us. Do you have any memories?" As he described what had happened before he went into a coma, Jonathan nodded and inhaled deeply. He told them how his mother had threatened to take action against Mark and his dubious enterprise because she was worried about tainted water. Jonathan had always felt that there was something strange about Mark, his stepfather. Jonathan had been playing with his action figures in the living room a few days prior when the news, which was about the rising number of illnesses and youngsters going into comas, was playing in the background. He heard his mother's anxious voice discussing tainted water and accusing Mark of polluting the community because of his dubious business dealings. When Jonathan asked Mark about his mother the following day, he lied and said she had gone to see a friend. Jonathan, however, was aware that something was off. He made the decision to look into it, and Jonathan crept into the back of Mark's vehicle after he departed. He was horrified to see his mother's backpack concealed inside, proving Mark's dishonesty. He overheard Mark's phone call and discovered that the factory was producing illicit medications, causing waste chemicals to contaminate the school's water supply and sicken the children. Even if it meant risking his life, Jonathan felt he had to face Mark and locate his mother. Since he was aware that confronting someone directly would not work, he followed his mother's advice to gather information and contact the police. And he was perfectly capable of doing it. Every night, Jonathan had seen that Mark spent a couple of hours in his vehicle going somewhere. His mother would be there too, if his suspicion was right. Jonathan hid in the rear of the truck that night. As he put everything on the line to find out the truth about his mother's disappearance and the strange comas afflicting his community, his heart raced. Jonathan had hoped that Mark would enter the garage before he had a chance to question his idea. Jonathan heard Mark answer the phone as they were about to leave. His worst suspicions were validated as he listened to the conversation. The plant Mark owned was producing illicit medications, and the waste chemicals were tainting the school's water supply, making the kids sick. Jonathan had a burst of rage and resolve. He had to prevent Mark and his cronies from doing any more damage. The vehicle door abruptly sprang open as he was about to flee, and Mark was standing there grinning menacingly. Mark mockingly said, "I knew you were up to something, you little brat," and he yanked Jonathan violently from the truck. Jonathan looked boldly at Mark, his heart thumping in his chest. His voice was shaking with courage as he said, "You can't keep hurting people like this." With a grim laugh, Mark clamped down on Jonathan's arm. "You're in serious trouble, child, and now you'll witness directly what happens to people who mistreat me." After dragging Jonathan into the dilapidated workshop, Mark noticed his mother asleep against the wall in a dark place. He hurried to her side, feeling both relieved and afraid, but Mark swiftly secured them both with heavy ropes to prevent them from escaping. Time went painfully slowly, and Jonathan's mother began to stir as the darkness became darker. She offered him a little comforting grin as their eyes locked. They started to discuss their escape plans in low tones. The creek nearby was their last chance to get rid of Mark and his cronies, according to Jonathan's mother. Jonathan and his mother implemented their plan around midnight, when the night was at its darkest. After removing themselves from the ropes, they cautiously slipped out of the facility. They could hear Mark's colleagues yelling and pursuing them as they dashed through the unkempt corridors and overgrown grounds, accompanied by the barking of vicious dogs. Their getaway was propelled by adrenaline, but they were aware that they needed to keep one step ahead of their assailants. In order to confuse the dog's smell, Jonathan's mother led him to the stream and told him to cross to the other side. Jonathan was driven forward by fear and resolve, but he slipped and plunged into the water in his hurry. He was surprised by the cold. Jonathan swam, struggling to keep afloat, but his motions were slow and the water seemed heavy. He felt lightheaded and confused as the manufacturing smells mingled with the water, causing him to gulp for air. Then, from the side of the river where his mother was, he heard a sharp gunshot. He drifted away before he could glance back because his vision became blurry. Until he awoke in the hospital today, the last thing he recalled was being pulled out of the water by a man in uniform with powerful arms. Dr. Shane listened carefully as Jonathan concluded his account of what had happened in the hospital room. Jonathan was first and foremost worried about his mother's safety, since he thought she might not have escaped that evening. The doctor's face was solemn as he promised Jonathan that they would notify the police of everything and begin a comprehensive search for his mother. As the entire community came together to help identify the missing parents and deliver justice to those guilty, there was optimism in the air the next day. Many people had been moved by Jonathan's tale, and the community was committed to helping him. Then, in a surprising change of events, Jonathan's mother, who was still living, entered the hospital room as the woman from his narrative. Jonathan hurried to give her a hug while tears ran down his face. After they escaped, she had been able to evade her captors, but she had been hiding to protect Jonathan. During a heartbreaking reunion, Jonathan's mother described how the police were able to apprehend Mark and his associates thanks to his courage and tenacity. The illicit activities were made public, and the factory was closed. After the tainted water supply was cleaned up, the kids were at last given the medical care they needed. Despite being shot during their escape, Jonathan's mother promised him that she would fully recover with medical attention. To the relief of their families, the youngsters who had been in comas began to awaken one by one as the town honored Jonathan's valiant efforts. Mark and his friends were apprehended by the authorities, and they were held accountable for their horrible acts. The community pulled together stronger than before, and the town was gradually getting better. Jonathan came to represent courage and optimism. He demonstrated that having courage and determination may have a significant impact, even in the face of extreme adversity. As they continued to encourage one another, he and his mother became closer. The town was extremely grateful to Jonathan for saving them, and they were certain that they could deal with any issues as a cohesive team.